When film director Paul Feig was in 6th grade, he did not have many friends, so his father gave him the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. In his NPR interview, Paul retells how the book taught him how to act interested in what other people liked, what other people wanted, and what other people did, and this would eventually win over their friendship. It was a game of manipulation, and the game worked. Paul implemented the tools he learned from the book and gained numerous friends, became the most popular guy in school, and ultimately the class president. Ironically, Paul hated being class president. In fact, he was the worst class president they had ever seen. He was so bad that his classmates actually impeached him and stopped being friends with him. He now had fewer friends and less influence on people. Looking at the story, Paul created a network of friendships based on a false foundation, which eventually blew up in his face. We too must realize that what we use as a foundation of our own relationships determine how long the relationships last and where we end up. It determines who we become. In the Joy of the Gospel, Pope Francis calls us to have a personal relationship with God. So when we hear personal relationship with God, think about what that really means. Is it just showing up for prayer on time, praying your rosary every day, making sure not to spend too much money, doing an act of charity each day, or attending daily mass? Or is it a total abandonment to God? Are we performing our prayers with an expectation for this or for that? Or are we becoming our prayers? I see the two brothers in today's gospel exemplifying this dichotomy. The older brother adheres to a life of obedience and duty, whereas the younger brother has a profound conversion after embracing a life of impetuosity and hedonism. One took the safe road, and the other a more difficult path. Two brothers, two different approaches to being in relationship with God. First, let us look at the older brother who took the safe road. Now, there is nothing wrong with taking the straight and narrow path, and although he is the downer of the story, how could one blame the older brother for being upset? He did what was told and remained obedient. But where is his party? It seems of a case of injustice from the father. However, is it more than just injustice? What I see is a relationship involving a sense of entitlement. What I notice in this older brother and within our country is the disease of entitlement. Thinking, I deserve this, or I earned that, or I should get this. Yes, there ought to be fairness in life, but when do we take it too far? We know when we cannot see, we know that we take it too far when we cannot see goodness in others. The older brother was fixated on what he was entitled to, that he was not able to rejoice in the goodness of his other brother. Sometimes we get jealous, and it may be because the other person is getting in the way of our goals, our dreams, or our agenda. If any of us are in this boat, only perfect love can drive out our blindness. Perfect love does not have an agenda. Perfect love does not have expectations. It is not jealous. Perfect love rejoices when it recognizes love in someone else. Now let us look at the younger brother. He acted impetuously, embracing a life of dissipation, a life of excess, then became humiliated when he found himself far worse than before. He admitted his wrongdoings and was ironically welcomed with a feast despite his shameful behavior. Now, what struck me most was the language in his rehearsed apology. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers. What I see is complete surrender. The younger brother had a relationship with a profound sense of humility. This is the kind of relationship we ought to have with God. However, acknowledging our weaknesses and being vulnerable, to put it plainly, sucks. Why would I want to tell my confessor that I committed the same sin again? Why would I tell my spiritual director my deepest and darkest thoughts? Why would I tell my formator that I may have apprehensions about my vocation? Admitting the dark corners of ourselves is the hard part. But notice what happens when the older brother heads back home seeking forgiveness. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son. If we just turn to God, he will run to us. Pope Francis reminds us that the Lord does not disappoint those who take this risk. Whenever we take a step toward Jesus, we come to realize that he is already there, waiting for us with open arms. As we have seen in the gospel, a relationship tied to entitlement leads to bitterness and anger, whereas a relationship based on humility leads to a feast. More importantly, a feast with God. Having this kind of relationship is when we become a new creation in Christ. Our faith, our relationship with God, is not just a means of filling in the holes of our personality, but something that enhances it. We may find within ourselves aspects and abilities that seem so foreign and new, but at the same time seem so natural and right. We may not be understood by people like the Pharisees and the scribes or the older brothers out there. But it will not matter to us because we are not just a cup filled to the brim. We are overflowing. I would like to close by reading a passage from the children's book, The Velveteen Rabbit. It is a story that captures the road to becoming a new creation after enduring trials and tribulations. In the story, a toy rabbit longs to become real, and his friend tells him the following. When you are real, you don't mind being hurt. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or who have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all. Because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand.